Hey Google, turn temperature on at 73 degrees.
All right, setting two thermostats to 73 degrees.
Welcome everyone to the University of New Mexico Law and Mental Health series. This is weekly discussions of practice and science featuring experts in behavioral health and the law. This is a series run by the Division of Forensic Behavioral Sciences of the University of New Mexico's Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in support with the New Mexico Behavioral Health Services Division. I'm Anthony Perillo, the Forensic Psychology Director here at the University of New Mexico. For our talk today, if you have any questions for our presenter, make sure you enter them in the Q&A box. You can enter those anytime you feel comfortable, but just know that we hold them to the end, and oftentimes it's not possible for us to get to all of them. If you are pursuing continuing medical education credits, there will be a sign-in sheet posted in the chat box shortly. If you're pursuing APA continuing education credits, also keep your eye on the chat box, but near the end of the presentation, around 40 to 50 minutes into the hour, there will be a link there. Make sure that you check that to see if it works for you. If it doesn't, save and bookmark that link for later. And after you complete the survey, make sure you save your certificate after you complete the survey because we don't have access to the completed survey certificates after the fact. If you missed last week's talk in the series, Dr. Anna Feynman's eye-opening discussion of psycholegal considerations around the incel movement is now available on our YouTube channel. The recording for this week's talk should also be available on our YouTube channel sometime later this week. And as a heads up for next week's talk in the series, we have Dr. Michael Brandon, who will be discussing challenges in doing death penalty related evaluations, using his experience in the Nicholas Cruz, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Parkland school shooting case as a case example for that. But circling back to this week, I'm honored and excited to introduce you to this week's speaker, who will be discussing a framework for parental capacity evaluations. This is Dr. Christopher Bishop. Dr. Christopher Bishop is a forensic psychologist in private practice in the D.C. metropolitan area for the past 20 years, and also associate professor of psychology at Trinity Washington University. Dr. Bishop currently serves as chair of the Broadening Representation, Inclusion, Diversity, and Global Equity Group for APLS, the Bridge Group, in Division 41 of the American Psychological Association. In addition, he is appointed to APA's Child Protection Matters Task Force, where the team has developed guidelines for forensic psychologists to promote ethically sound practices in child protection evaluations. Dr. Bishop's area of expertise are competency to stand trial, parental capacity, sentencing mitigation, and other numerous types of forensic evaluations. So Dr. Bishop, Christopher, on behalf of the University of New Mexico, we're thankful and excited for you joining our series. And I know it's a personal honor for me. I'm very excited for you sharing your expertise with all of us today. I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. Start with my slides. Good afternoon, everyone. We need to start with, Anthony talked about receiving continuing education certificate completion. At the end of this, there will be a QSR code for you to get your certificate. As a disclosure, I do not have any financial arrangements related to the content of this activity. And as a disclaimer, the views expressed in this presentation are those of the speaker, do not necessarily represent the views, policies, and positions of the University of New Mexico. See a question here already? Okay. So the course objectives and goals. This workshop is designed to help you with the following. Identify your readiness to conduct parental capacity assessments, examine your own biases and work with marginalized populations, and analyze the referral process or viewpoints of child protection agencies and their core expectations. I'm going to post a poll before we get started. Kind of want to see who's in the room. I think once the poll is done, Anthony will post the results. Okay. Yep. So we see mid-career seems to be the highest in senior career. A couple grad students, And it seems like most people are not familiar in this area. And there's some polls, 24% of advanced beginners can recognize. Oh, there's more. And let's see, 18% are competent, 11% proficient, and 2% has developed this through user experience. So it's a good fair mix. So I appreciate this information. Okay. So I'm going to start with understanding abuse in the United States. So here on this slide, we're looking at quite a few statistics that came from the Children, Youth, and Family Child Bureau in 2022. But first thing we want to understand is about what is abuse. So, right, children living through abuse, violence, and other traumatic events unnecessarily suffers the ill effects of the rest of their lives. These altering life events are called ACEs. So I'm pretty sure if you work in any child protection system or just work with children, you're all familiar with ACEs. What we know is abuse is a health concern to children. And what we find neglect is the most common abuse that we actually run upon, especially in this field. Child abuse and neglect by parents and other caregivers happens around the world at alarming rates. And globally, it's estimated about 1 billion children ages of 2 to 17 have experienced physical, sexual, or emotional violence and neglect in the past year. So I think that's significant of why we're here today. We want to understand CAPTA. So psychologists must understand the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, which is CAPTA, and its impact on jurisdiction, law, and policy guide their work. So the goals of the federal law is to help provide comprehensive care to the actual victims or potential victims of child abuse. It helps to integrate the services provided by a wide variety of agencies, including educational, legal, mental health, and social service organizations. So what's the benefits of CAPTA? It provides grants to states to prevent child abuse and neglect, improve how systems respond to it, and it funds small amounts of training and research on how to reduce maltreatment. So here in this slide, I kind of give you an overline of law. Again, CAPTA has been amended out several times. The last amendment we had was in 2010, and we were supposed to expire in 2015. I do not have an update on that, but Congress continues to fund CAPTA. So it really is about how do we protect vulnerable children. So let's talk about factors considered when engaging in parental capacity assessments. First thing I want to talk about is competence. What you see here are proposed guidelines for psychological evaluation in child protection matters. We have submitted the revised. So these are, I'm going to kind of reference these throughout the presentation about some of the things that we propose that, and doing this work, what it looks like. But I'm going to start with competence. McGaffey in 2020 stated that competence is the effective application of knowledge, skills, and attitudes to provide service to vulnerable client populations. So we talk about how do we actually approach this work. The guidelines says psychologists seek to gain competence in conducting child protection evaluations through an optimal combination of education, training, experience, consultation, and peer supervision. So as you think about your work, or you think about starting this work, really think about what do you bring to the table as competence? What is your education background? What is your training? And training cannot always be formal training. It can be supervised training as well. Making sure that when you are with someone that you get that learning. I did that. I came from a clinical psychology program, and my job in this area was getting good supervision about the work that I was doing. The next guideline that we have, and again, I won't cover all the guidelines, but I'm going to hit some of the guidelines for the purpose of this presentation. The evaluator is expected to possess specialized competence that includes knowledge of assessment procedures, as well as specific knowledge of child and family development, psychopathology, and applicable legal standards and laws relevant to child safety. So that means that as a psychologist, we're thinking about children. What is your background in children? And also you have to know your background of adults, because a lot of most of the evaluation is that the adult is the person we're going to evaluate, but it relates to how that parent or an adult or caregiver impacts the child. So really understanding psychopathology from the adult side, but also developmental psychology. How does it impact children's growth and social emotional functioning? Psychologist interaction with its legal and child protection systems. So again, these are two proposed guidelines. Psychologists strive to obtain jurisdiction-specific specialized knowledge regarding types of child maltreatment and the characteristics of children and families reported child protective services, as well as psychologists endeavor to understand the court referral questions, the scope of the evaluation, the anticipated use of findings, and expected timeline. What we have to understand that we really have to be aware of what jurisdiction we are. There's so many different systems as it relates to the legal system and the child protection system. In this area, there are two entities that we have to be aware of conducting PCAs. First, most referrals are generated by child protective agencies. Therefore, it's important to understand the needs of your jurisdiction. In my jurisdiction, child protection wants the psychologist to understand the risk of children and support it from the court system. This may not always be the same in each jurisdiction. Nonetheless, it's really important that you review the referral to ensure that you can answer the questions. If not, notify the referral service if it's within your competency. I'm going to do a case example, and I'm kind of talk about how my referral process was. Okay. Anthony, someone saying audio cuts out because the speaker stopped moving around. Okay, sorry. And I'm hoping everyone can hear me. I'm gonna turn my volume up as well.
I've heard you completely clearly so far.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Look at culture competency. So one of the guidelines that we talk about is psychologists conducting child protection evaluations aspire to recognize how families' opportunities and disadvantage may have been socially or systematically determined. Another guideline, psychologists strive to remain aware of personal biases, societal prejudice, and the need for culturally competent practice. Psychologists are mindful of maintaining a fair and impartial approach to child protection evaluation. I reviewed an article called Ming in 2020, stated that in the recent years, researchers paid more attention to the differences and abilities of individuals to deal effectively with people from other cultural backgrounds, given that we're mostly connected globally. That Laugh in 2021 cited that the children of color are overrepresented in the child welfare system. And I see that all the time. I worked for child welfare about 15 years. And I would say majority of the clientele was people of color. And Black children have been most significantly impacted by the racial disproportionality. So we know that racism does play a role. Systemic racism plays a real role in how people are referred and understanding how people parent. Racial disproportionality in child welfare exists because of influences that are both external to the child welfare system and part of the child welfare system. Detlef argued that internal and external causes of disproportional involvement originates from common underlying factors, structural institutional racism that is both within the child welfare system and part of the large society as a whole. So let's talk about this. Let's get into the nuts and bolts about this, parental capacity. So these are some definitions that we propose in our guidelines. Parenting capacity refers to the potential for parenting in a good enough manner on a long-term basis, specific to the needs of children in question. Norman cited that the concept of good enough parent suggests that one rejects the ideal there is such a thing as a perfect person parental ability. No one's perfect. And instead focus on what factors in the parental capacity that are sufficient to meet the child's basic needs. And so that's kind of important, right? Like when we're thinking about capacity, when we have kids, there is no manual to say, how do I take care of a child? I was a young parent myself. And so it was a big lesson for me to talk about how to become a father as a late adolescent, to think about how to raise this child. Did I make any mistakes in raising this child? Did I put this child in danger? Was I providing what this child needed? Second terminology is an individual may currently possess parenting abilities for short periods of time in specific circumstance without the necessary skills to parent effectively in the long term. So we're talking about two different things. Capacity is, do I have the ability to do this and sustain? Because that's a lot of the questions that are asking me. What is the capacity? Can they do this on a long-term basis? Then we talk about ability. What current abilities did he have to actually do this work? Fung in 2021 suggests that parenting abilities include parent self-efficacy, underlies parent confidence to raise their child. So that's one of the things we had, what parents we're looking at. Are they confident to do the ability, to do the raising of the child? And sometimes their ability is false. They just feel they can do it without actually having the skill set. The third terminology we discuss in our guidelines are competent parenting involves adaptability to the changing requirements and circumstance of a particular child. So being a competent parent is understanding change. I had a case where the mother really just wanted to parent babies and toddlers. She had a hard time once they start growing, they start questioning, they start being more curious. It was very easy for her to handle a child who all she had to do was feed, clothe, and bathe. So that talked about her inflexibility to be a competent parenting as the child got older. So one of the things we talk about is forensically relevant instruments. And people are like, well, aren't they all just instruments? So psychometrics are commonly known as used as forensic evaluations. There are psychological tests and measures developed for assessment, diagnosis, and treatment plan. Whereas forensic relative instruments can be distinguished from forensic assessment instruments. Rogers talked about this in their article. For example, FAIs focus on specific legal standards and their included functional capacities, such as the CAST-MR. While FRIs address clinical construct, there are sometimes pertinent legal standards. So when we talk about working with parents and talk about how do we assess them, we really have to think about what's the referral question and what instrument is actually going to help us answer the referral question. And it's not going to always be the same. So it's not like a standard battery if I'm doing a competency to stay in trial or some other instrument that I'm looking at. Is really about, because it's very unique to working with each individual and each family and also each culture. Another proposed guideline is psychologists strive to use multiple and complementary methods of data gathering. So when we talk about assessing parents this way, what are we looking for? What is going to, again, what I said earlier, how are we going to answer these questions? Psychologists endeavors to utilize robust, informative, and culturally sensitive psychological assessment methods and instruments that are administered in a methodologically sound fashion and are relevant to the purposes of the child protection matter. So I want to talk about this case that I had, and I want to be a disclaimer to this case. So I got this case during the beginning of the pandemic. So it was really scary for all of us, as you can imagine. You all lived through it. And at the time, we were thinking about how do we open our doors again? At this point, again, it's in the very beginning. We're getting these requests. We just could not take on cases. So we really had to really think about how do we do this work in the pandemic. Excuse me. So this particular case, Mr. Brown, again, all the names are redacted, all the information redacted. So this, to protect the clients. Mr. Brown is a 53-year-old African-American male who identifies as Muslim. What I also know about Mr. Brown is this is not his first time being a parent. He has older children. He also is military. Okay. Sorry, I was looking at some of the questions, and we're gonna talk about that. I say he's also Muslim, so I had adequate information about Muslim because I've worked in a lot of legal places. So I work in the courts, I work in the jails, and so a lot of people I come in contact with are Muslim, but there are also different type of Muslim. There's not one type of Muslim, just like there's not one type of Christian. So really understanding how does that play into this particular matter. He has an infant son, we're going to call him Malik, with a 33-year-old Congolese female who identifies also as Muslim. So we already see there's a big age difference here. The mother moved to Congo about 5 years when she was at 5 years old and was recruited to be a child soldier at 10 years old. So I did not have a lot of access to the mother. The mother was seen in another evaluator in our practice, and we do not share. So just to be clear about that, we get a lot of parents, and the same evaluator will not see both parents. So we will separate them so that there's no biases in our evaluation. What I did know about this mother was, again, she had another child. She was that was due to rape, being in the war at a very young age. She also had a significant drug problem. And this is kind of how we got involved. Okay. And then Mr. Brown has a history of IPV with intimate partner violence or domestic violence. The word we use now is intimate personal violence, but it's still domestic violence with his son mother. Now, with that, and my case, with the study with this case was that Mr. Brown never admitted to domestic violence or IPV. My understanding also is that the mom did not admit to that either. So, oops, sorry about that. But it was a question which I'm going to present in that slide about how do we start to address this. Also, Mr. Brown does not have his own place. He is roommates with an elderly man. And it was suggested that this elderly man might also have forms of dementia, because what was happening was that Mr. Brown was sometimes asked the roommate to also help care for the child. Now, Mr. Brown, the mother was actually was substance use. So when the child was born, the baby came out with drugs, and so that led to the Child Protective Service to remove Malik from mom. So when they removed Malik from mom, it was temporary and foster care. Mr. Brown was able to get temporary custody, and he had to sign what we call a safety plan. Now, the safety plan was that he would not allow Malik to be left alone, unsupervised with the mom. Well, he violated that. It was a pop-up visit by CPS, and they found that the mom was solely taking care of Malik while Mr. Brown was at work, and therefore removed Malik out of Mr. Brown's custody. And again, that's how I got involved of looking at Mr. Brown's ability. So I wanted to share with you, here is a referral question I was given to look at. Does Mr. Brown have the capacity to understand why his infant son was at risk when placed alone with his roommate or with his mother when she was testing positive for non-prescribed narcotics? Does he present with sound intellectual functioning? And if so, why is he not able to have insight to the risk of his own son? That's a fully loaded question. That's a couple of questions within a question, but I wanted to show you exactly what I was given for this case. So one thing we're looking at is, what are the risks? Okay, as I stated earlier, I'm told this roommate is very elderly and also may possess some level of dementia. So that was concern for child welfare. Child welfare is about what are the risk factors. As I stated earlier, mom, we know, is actively using drugs. And so they're concerned about, this child being left alone with mom without supervision. Does he present with silent intellectual functioning? So they're asking me more about his cognitive abilities. And does he have insight into the risk of the son? Then they want to ask, is it possible that Mr. Brown have a mental health diagnosis? And that is a very common question asked in these cases, is there a mental health concern? And so far, these bullet points, I can answer most of them. I was a little concerned about the roommate. Again, it was COVID. And so I had to, and I'll get into a little later, how I had to kind of get around that particular question. Because at that point, we weren't meeting with a lot of people. A lot of things were during Zoom, as they still are Zoom since the pandemic, of really interviewing people. Given that Mr. Brown, next question, given that Mr. Brown is an inaccurate reporter of his history and current situation, what are the marks to look for in assessing progress's ability to remedy reasons why Malik came into foster care? Again, that's a very loaded question as well. My understanding at the time was Mr. Brown was very guarded. He did not want to give a lot of information to CPS. He felt that this was unneeded. Sorry, I'm reading a question. Why is it relevant the sample cases need to be functional? I don't really understand that question.
I think he means diagnosis.
Oh, okay. Why was diagnosis, or ask me why was diagnosis important for CPS? Is that the question?
That's my understanding of it.
Okay. So the reason, that is a CPS question. They want to know if a person has mental health issues, and if so, what would be some treatment recommendations? They also want to know, is it something that can be treated? So that's important for CPS. They want to, and that's really what the big reason is. A lot of clients sometimes does come in with mental health issues. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be parents. I'll be very clear about that. If you have a mental health issue, it doesn't mean you cannot be a parent. It just means that for them, for the answer CPS, they just want to make sure that you're getting the proper treatment so that you continue to be a good parent. Thank you, Bruce. I hope I answered your question. The next question, is Mr. Brown's past alleged substance use impact his ability to keep Malik safe? That was important because according to Mr. Brown, he doesn't have a drug history. He doesn't have a drug issue. So I had to ask more questions. Where is this coming from? I believe they said that the mother had told CPS that he did have a past substance use issue, and so they really wanted to put that in there for me to try to look at. Now, what I wanted to understand too is I don't generally do substance abuse evaluations. I do have a background. I ran an IOP program. I got certified in SASE, but that's been a while ago. And so for me, I'm not going to focus on a substance abuse evaluation because I don't feel at this point I'm competent to make that type of assessment. So if through my data, through my interviews, through the assessment, if I think there might be possible, I refer them out for a substance abuse assessment. So just for me to be upfront, this is something I'm not willing to do, and I let them know this is not what I can do. Here's what I can do. I can look at what are some of the factors. I can get the information and make a recommendation if I feel that the person should get a substance abuse assessment. And then at the end of this, if so, what are the forms of treatment that Mr. Brown would benefit from? So that would be if I feel like it'll be helpful for Mr. Brown to get a substance abuse assessment. Okay. All right. So we talk about measurements, collateral contact information, and we'll get to all of these. Sorry about that, keeps moving. I'll get to each of these for a second. Yes, Richard, I do think there are, to answer your question, there are CPS is short staff. There is underfunded limited training, but I think it's really based also by your jurisdiction. My jurisdiction actually is a pretty wealthy jurisdiction, and they're not understaffed. I think they actually have probably more than what they need. So I think that's jurisdiction specific. And answering Alex's question, yes, there are some, these referral questions are very common to the evaluation. And I can answer that. So before I move on to this, working with the system for such a long time, I actually helped them develop a way to answer questions. So when they send me a referral, it's very detailed. I get the full background of the client's history. I had them choose different options, what they want to look at. And I had to really work with them about what I can answer. So that was years of working with CPS to try to develop a better way to ask questions so that I could be helpful to them. All right, so measurements, collateral information. So again, going back to the guidelines, we propose psychologists are encouraged to determine the methods that are appropriate to address referral issues, as I stated earlier. Psychologists also strive to use multiple and complementary methods of data gathering. So you just can't depend on one measure to answer the question. You really have to look at multiple ways to get the question answered. Psychologists endeavor to utilize robust, informative, and culturally sensitive psychological assessment methods and instruments that are administered in a methodologically sound fashion and are relevant to the purpose of the child protection matter. So you're just not fishing. And that's what the issue was when I first started working there years ago. It was everything under the sun. And it was a fishing expedition. And I said, you can't do that. Especially you can't do that to people. Be very specific. What are you looking to? What are you looking for to assess risk? So again, going back to my disclaimer, it was COVID. So it was very scary at the time about how to approach this. I think this is one of the first cases I think I did during the pandemic where we start to have people come in. We really had to work hard. We met for many weeks as a group to talk about how to do this work. So going back to the first assessment, the WASE-4 was one of the things I want to answer about the intellectual piece. So, and that was fine. He actually had a full scale of 90. I also did comprehension because I find working with this population, even though information is there, that doesn't really help me. That tells me what they know in school. But understanding how they think about the world using that comprehension, I think is very useful. So I will use some of the extra subtests to kind of figure out how to better answer the question. I usually start with the PAI, the Personality Assessment Inventory. I'm gonna tell you why I do that. When I do this work and I start with the MMPI, it kind of doesn't work well with the population I work with. It is too narrow. That yes and no has always been very hard for a lot of the people I work with of color. So I try to start with the PAI because it gives that Likert scale. It goes back to that Likert scale of choices. And when I gave that, unfortunately, it did not work out well for me. It was barely valid. It didn't give me much more insight into understanding some of the factors, such as his personality, some of the subtests, anger, everything I'm trying to look at. It wasn't very helpful. So I generally tried not to give more than one objective measure. Because it was minimally valid, I gave the MMPI to see how that panned out. And actually, it was much more robust in giving that information. I gave a parent distress index, fourth edition. Now, again, Malik was living with Mr. Brown. So therefore, he had that experience of dealing with parenting stress. So I thought that was a useful tool to kind of help me understand how Malik and Mr. Brown are working together. Is it stress? Because we know with parenting, it's naturally to be stressful as a parent. It's not something that's easy, but it doesn't also, if he's highly stressed, doesn't make him a bad parent. It just means that he just needs to think about how to manage the stress. Anthony, I'm getting a lot of questions. So do I answer these questions as I go, or just kind of wait to the end?
If you prefer, I can always proctor these at the end. That's what most people
Okay,
prefer.
yeah. I'm going back. The pausing is I want to make sure that I'm trying, as people are putting questions, I want to try to answer as best as possible.
Yeah, we can go ahead and hold the rest till the end, and I'll throw some out your way. Sorry. All right. Then I gave the adult adolescent parenting inventory, Form A. Now, this was a tool that I try to use to kind of get to understand the client, understand about how they're parenting. Now, interestingly, a recent article came out in 2022. Again, this was a pandemic. I think Catherine Moon actually got an article out to suggest that this measure is not actually culturally good for African Americans. So I haven't used that since, but that's important to know when we talk about cultural competency. So that is not actually a good measure to use with African Americans, because it says that it doesn't really capture the parenting styles of African American families. So again, that article came out in 2022. This is 2020 when I'm actually administering that. So just let you know, you have to go back and look at how you are using some of these tools to make sure that they're still relevant in today's assessments. Right. Now, what I want to say the next, and I divide this up for a purpose. So I said qualitative analysis supplemental. Well, I just think he's moving, sorry. What I want to say about that is these tests are not used to answer my question. What these things do help me develop my questions for the parent. When I generally do testing, I like to start with the data first. I don't like to reading all. I don't want to read all the records that I'm given. I don't want to do all the other biases that might come to my head. I want to see what the data leads me first. And so after the ones you saw me do, the Westler's other assessment techniques, administer those tests, then I go ahead and do what I call qualitative. So the individual care, personal, and parent history. I got this from a conference. And again, what it does for me is it tells how are you parenting. So it's not used to talk about his parenting, but it helps me understand how he was parenting. I do use a sense completion series, which is on parenting. Again, it's qualitative analysis. It's not used in my report to talk about the parent. It's helped me understand how to develop good questions to answer the referral question. Of course, I did clinical interview with Mr. Brown. That was hard in itself. I'm going to talk a little bit more. I won't talk about the whole case, but I'm going to kind of give you some highlights. Mr. Brown is a very tough person to work with. He can be authority figures. He doesn't do well with authority figures, and so that was tough. Even if I go back to the Westler test, right? He was very angry and block design. He's like, "What does this have to do with parenting?" And I actually think he would have got higher on the test. He got a 79 perceptual reasoning and 92 working memory. Process speed was 89, and full scale was 90.
because he has got so frustrated with even doing this test that he just didn't want to be here. He was very upset about it. And then you see that max client resistance scale. What I want to talk about that is not a standardized test. Again, it's a pandemic. We worked hard to talk about can we determine who's going to follow the rules coming into our office. And so we interviewed the social worker, which on this particular case, they're called family specialists too. And we had a scale that we had them fill out to see, is this person going to follow the rules by wearing a mask, kind of be calm, and be able to really work with us. Because it was the Westler test, I had to bring him in for the testing. From there, it told me that it might be some future issues. So he did the Westler scales with me. The rest of the scales he did at the CPS office, and that was done virtually, where I monitor. So if I give the PI, MPI, I am watching him actually take the test, so that I can protect the confidentiality of the testing. So that was important. And then when he came back to my office was the parent-child observations. Unfortunately, our agency doesn't have the best observation room, where ours is much better. It's a very huge room, and we did allow him to come back to do the parent-child observation with the child, which again, it's an 18-month-old. And so that goes back to the guideline as well. It says to clarify and supplement other data, psychologists seek records, media sources, collateral informants with information relevant to child protection evaluation. So you can see down there, I interviewed a lot of people. And what they're also recommending, the proposed guidelines are, when conducting child protection evaluation, psychologists strive to observe parent-child interaction if it can be accomplished in a safe and secure manner for all. And for me, it's very important for me, I've always been this way, that it's important for me to see how the child and parent interacts. I'm not in the room. We have a camera. The parents are aware. We don't hide anything from the parents. They're very aware that there's a camera going on. And I am still watching the visits, but also taking notes. And I can go back and look back to my notes to kind of see what I'm observing. Again, the collateral context was the family specialist. Mr. Brown was also referred for a service called Fatherhood. So I got to talk to the coordinator of that to kind of give me insight about how's he learning. Because that's important, right? Because if he is getting skills to be a better father, and that's important to my assessment about his capability, his capacity, and his ability. He had therapeutic visitations. I'm pretty sure most facilities do that. Some do it at a center. This particular agency that I work for, CPS, they actually hired people to do therapeutic visitations, and they're supervised. Interesting, in those interviews, there was a number of people. So I actually at one time interviewed a therapeutic visitation worker, the parent coach and training, and the parent supervisor. And I actually interviewed them all on a Zoom call. And it was just interesting, even some of their language. Like one of the persons said he was aggressive. And I had to define aggressive, because I'm not gonna put aggressive in my report unless it meets that criteria. He wasn't aggressive. Based on how she explained it, and I educated her to that, and she understood that and said, well, I guess he wasn't aggressive. They had talked about him giving a grape to Malik, and then I peel the grape. And so, okay, I understand that part. At that point, at that time, I think it was 18 months. You want to make sure that it's swallowable for the child. I know parents who have different parent styles. For example, I just had a nephew, and my nephew was very angry because his mother wanted to give a 6-week-old baby rice. And she was like, she justified it. When you were 6 weeks old, I gave you rice. And he's like, no, you can't do that. The pediatrician told me not to. So I had to really, be mindful of some cultural practices, some cultural myths about how to parent that child around food. Was it dangerous? There were things that he had to work on, but it wasn't that he was intentionally trying to put the child in danger. Okay. Documents are reviewed. Again, after I went through the data, then I would look at this type of information because I did not want this information to make me biased about anything I was doing with this family. So the request for parental capacity assessment, that's my referral. And like I said, I went through that. Things that I didn't feel I could do, I went back to the worker and said, I need for you to, in writing, to change this, because this is what I can do. And I think that's important because when the judge reviewed the case, they need to see what did the psychologist actually agree to. There were court reports, which were interesting because the court reports actually talks about there is a history of substances. And Mr. Brown was very angry at me because I found charges of him with these drug charges. And he wanted me to take out the report. I explained to them I could not. Again, when I start a assessment, I have our own form that we give, and it's very long in detail. It talks about being videotaped. It talks about asking people questions. So I'm very upfront about how the process goes. And I think it's really important, psychologists, that we're very upfront when we're talking with clients about what the process looks like. Even in our process, we talk about debriefing. Our proposed guidelines actually talks about debriefing as well, but we've always used debriefing that I can go over what I'm gonna say in my report so that you're not shocked in court. And that's what I don't want. I don't want people going and say, I don't know what Dr. Bishop's going to talk about. And he was very angry about some of the things, some things that he liked, some things he didn't like, because he got very upset and kind of rude. We had to disconnect the calls and give him a warning, but he never got past the part about the drugs that I found in the court records. So he was very upset I got that. There's transfer summaries from CPS of the history. There's foster care, abuse, neglect, substance exposed infants. So I got all those records about Malik's birth, what we know. I read all through the visitations records and any medical records to kind of keep me informed about what I'm looking at. I'm going to answer one question. I know someone asked about a reading level, and that is important. Based on the information I got, he had adequate reading level, but when I suspect there is a reading level, I will give the RAT, and you have to really look at what instrument is the instrument, because there are times when if I have someone who's reading a secondary reading level, I can't just give them the MAPI or the PI. So I had to think about how else do I approach that. So these are factors to consider when I assess for a PCA. I look at neglect. Again, I use a CAPTA. I look at forensic relevant instruments, the court referral. I had to pay attention. He's African-American, Muslim, former military. That played a role too, how he kind of approached. I do get people who are either current or former military. There's a different approach about orderly. Doesn't make them bad, and we're not going to use that to against the parent, but it's something we have to be mindful of and be able to explain that to the court. Cognitive functioning, I said again, looking at the ways. Aggression, I experienced some of that, but I was able to redirect. And so that was important for me. Like if he became upset with me in assessment, I could redirect him and he would back down. So I had to pay attention to that. He also got along with the social worker, who was a first social worker. And I thought, and she was a female. Because they kept saying that, you know, he doesn't do well with females. Some of the people I interviewed were males, some were females, but his social worker is a female. And so actually he was able to establish a good relationship with social worker. So that was helpful information for me to know. His rearing practices, his current the way he was reared was important for me. His current practice was important to me. And that was through interviewing, legal history, understanding domestic violence or IPV. Now, that was hard for me because, again, he did not have, he would not admit to domestic violence. And it just, between the both of them, it was really hard to look at that. I'm gonna ask a quick question about the reference, about is Catherine Moon 2022, I think it's in Child Year in Review. That's the reference for that particular reference about AAPI. So thank you. Fractures addressed, again, domestic violence, I just said, it was hard. So that made, because I really couldn't get a good read, it made me think about risk factors, because someone wasn't being honest about it, because police have been called. I didn't have the information. There were calls for police on this couple, but I didn't have much. I didn't have a police record for that one. Looking at capacity, how is he able to do this for a long period of time? Again, he's raised older children before, so I know that he has some level of doing that. And then what was his current ability? So these are the factors I tried to look at. Summary of Mr. Brown. So I told you cognitive, he's intact. Now, risk for independent parenting. Based on my interview with him, looking at some of the testing, what I did come up with, where there was a personality disorder there. It wasn't stable, but he had these antisocial traits, just based on all the history, the things we talked about. He did lack recognizing the risk. He told me that, why can't she watch her own child? Like it just clicked to him about the danger that would be if she's high raising on watching the child. So that was important to me as well. And I want to talk about risk. Everyone has risk. Even so I usually categorize things as low risk. That means minimum. I never want to say no one's ever going to do anything wrong. As a parent, I had low risk. The next category I use is moderate risk based on the factors, and then severe. Severe is looking at, like, you're looking at physical abuse, you're looking at emotional abuse. I'm looking at a lot of factors, and that the person does not recognize, do not accept, do not try to find ways to think about how to do things different. He had a level of defensiveness that also played a role for me, because when there's a level of defensiveness, that there are just ways that I cannot always answer that question about risk. And I do want to note too about African Americans, going back to the MMPI. It is not uncommon for parents to be defensive. So just because they put defensive on a test still doesn't mean they're parenting. That is actually common. If you go to the MMPI, there's actually, you can compare kids, adults on child custody evaluation. You know, this was not child custody, but you can use that to look at the percentages and where people fall, who answer those questions. So just, that is an MMPI 3. I recommend individual therapy. Now, let me go beyond that. I actually recommend he needed more like mandated therapy. And there are literature said you should not recommend mandated therapy. But for this particular case, I think if he could find someone that he could connect with, that he could get a lot out of therapy. Because I think that was very important. I did ask for a substance abuse screening, because again, I don't do that, but I had this legal history. And there was, even though it said he didn't use drugs in a very long time, I wanted another professional to be able to go back and look at that. Parenting courses, even though he was on the fatherhood program, parenting courses based on the things I found about, like, the grapes, just kind of understanding how kids develop. I think it was important for him to do that. Increased visitations. He did a really good job during the observation. He was very in tune with his child. There were some things he did. He played some music that wasn't child friendly. And, I mentioned that in my report, but as far as him parenting and those visitations, I did about 3 different days of visitation. And because he's on 18 months, I usually do a half an hour. When they're older, it's longer. And then there was just case management. For example, he was former military, and he never heard a TRICARE. Well, TRICARE is what the military uses for insurance to get therapy. I'm a veteran, and so it was to me, it was kind of odd that he did not know this information. And I do believe, even though I don't have the proof, that I think he might got dishonorable discharge. So I wasn't sure. So I asked for case management to kind of really help him navigate the system. As I'm wrapping up, time goes by fast. These are the questions I wanted for people to ask, think about. Assess your readiness to conduct this work. Do I have the proper training prepared to conduct this work? What are you doing to prepare? If this is something you're interested in, what are you doing to prepare to conduct this work? Have I completed assessment work with clients who have diversity in age, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, national cultural origins, disability, language, SES, and immigration/naturalization status? Because again, I think this is different from child custody work, because with child custody, you're looking at different SES mostly. When you're looking at this work, you're looking at a lot of lower SES. And so you need to be really mindful about your approach in working with this population. Do you have colleagues from diverse backgrounds that can consult with you on these type of cases? I still consult with colleagues that do this work. I do not believe in working in a silo. I'm part of a group. We do presentations. So I think that's important. Do I have access to take proper training conducting this type of work? Again, as I told you when I started out, I was under supervision. Even though I was licensed, I still wanted supervision just to make sure. I had similar work with this, but I want to make sure that I had the proper guidance. Am I prepared to be exposed to children being abused on a regular basis? That's important. You can be traumatized, vicarious trauma, just working in this case after case after case. Are you able to separate the way you were reared as a child and work with families that may be different parenting styles that I may not agree with? And that's important, especially with the social workers. When they go to foster care, it is not uncommon for them thinking that's where the best place is for them. My belief is always that the child's best place is always with the family of origin, unless there's a reason why they cannot be, or how do we start to work towards that? And so sometimes they look at the foster parents have higher SES. That doesn't make them better parents. We're missing the whole point about good enough. And so you cannot use how you were reared to look at other cultures. So make sure you prepare for that. Do I have the ability to recognize our own limitations to avoid making assumptions about other cultures? That's very important. Even some of the work we do, we have to put limitations in our work. So that's important for me. There's things that are going to be limited. Do I have the Constitution to be cross-examined by 3 more attorneys to defend my work on the stand? That's very important. This is different from criminal court. The most I've been cross-examined is 5 attorneys at one time. The mom has an attorney. The child has an attorney. There's a prosecutor. If they have multiple children, there's 2 GLs. So I've been on the stand where I'm cross-examined by 5 attorneys. I think the longest I've been on the stand for that might have been an hour, that everyone gets to ask me questions about my report. Okay. I have my references. I know we're near the end, and this is the QSR for you to do the evaluation.
Right at the top of the hour. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris.
It was tough.
Well, there's a lot of ground to cover here, both in terms of just pure material, but then also trying to, thoroughly discuss a specific example here. So I want to
all the details. I mean, that report was about 30 pages. So there's a lot of details that I could not cover in this 1 hour.
Well, and thank you so much for covering all of that as concisely as you could there. We did get a number of questions, as you've seen, that you've answered throughout. We do have more, of course, that we can throw a few out there too. For those of you, I do want to make sure that we are at the top of the hour. The CEU links are in the chat box. They are active. They do work. If you can't answer them now, make sure you copy and save that link for later on, so that you can answer your CEU credits later on. So one person there wanted to clarify about recommendations for visitations being increased. Was that actually something that's recommended in the report or not? And then so clarifying the whole issue between custody and capacity, because wouldn't that be a custody recommendation?
Yeah. So one of the recommendations for again, they asked me, what should we do? I mean, sometimes I get questions about if a child go back, which child should go home, or so I get those type of questions. At that time, when he broke the safety plan, his visitation got very limited. I think he got maybe like 1 hour a week. And so my recommendation was, again, I leave it to CPS. I'm saying that I see the work he's doing, and I think the child would do better with bonding with his father by increasing the visitations. I don't tell them how many hours to increase. If they ask me that, I can give an opinion, but I leave it to the CPS to make those determinations. And if they ask me to come to a treatment team meeting, I hear what everybody has to say, and I can voice my opinion at that point.
Sure. In the meantime, someone asked if you could pop up your reference slide again. I think there will be a lot of people that will say like, oh, where can I get more info?
Okay.
And
I will, again, I'm going to, again, get back with Anthony about making sure you have the link, all the slides. So we're working on that right now. Give me a second.
Wonderful. Thanks.
I'll go back. There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. And someone wanted to, ask there at the end there that, of course, custody and parental capacity are very similar but different, and sometimes courts don't even know that. How do you distinguish between them for courts?
Well, it's pretty easy for me because CPS is the person who's referring to me, and unfortunately, it's very few that have two parents, but it's always about parental capacity assessment. That's the question that's always asking me. It's always that. So I don't have the issue because it is about the child. There has been some kind of abuse, neglect, and therefore that's what the focus is on at that point.
Thank you. Do you recommend any particular structure, format, formalized process for parent-child observation, something like the Marshak interaction method?
Yes, actually, I trained on that, the Marshak. So yes, I do use elements from the Marshak as part of that. That's actually my basis. I look at those different skill sets, what they learn and stuff like that. There are also things I do for, let's say I've done an assessment, I've done the observation, and there's a lot of issues in that observation. I actually will meet with the parent by themselves to talk about some of my observations, because what I want to see is, can they learn from that? So I then continue to see more observations, see if they learn from anything that I taught them from that piece, because that tells me they can learn.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
And of course, I just want to add, it depends on the ages too, right? So when you're talking about observations, because they were older, I'll be interviewing the kids as well. And when there are multiple kids, I actually break it down. I do each child individually. Then I do dyads, and depending on how many kids there are. And then if they're like, I've gotten point people have 8 kids, and my room is very huge to hold that. And then I'll get all 8 because I want to see how the parents is able to manage having that many kids in a location.
Other than logistics of availability, how do you decide when to schedule those kinds of interactions, or the order of doing that?
Yeah, so they're at the end. So I get through all the data first. I get through my interview first. Then I do observations. And then if I have any questions from the observation, I can always go back and do that with them.
Wonderful. As we're wrapping up here, if you could advance to the next slide with the QR code so that other people can have that. Excellent, thank you. When you were talking about near the end, you were talking about different risk levels, and someone wanted to follow up of how you determine risk levels that you were referring to there.
Well, that's more complex. So based on all the data I have, based on the parent's ability to learn, also what type of abuse it was, because like if it's physical abuse, I've used a different measure. So again, it's depending what the situation is. I rarely ever had severe risk. It was the child was severely abused. The parent would not take any account for it, and so to me that made me nervous. For this particular client, it was moderate risk, and the reason why it's moderate risk was what I talked about. He does not feel that the child's ever at risk. And so that was concerning for me. And so he would, and he's also, he won't hold the truth. Like if he makes promises, he's shown that he can't keep it. And so Again, and I don't, just so you know, I never say if the parent should be a parent. That's not my job. That's the judge's job. So I never do that. I talk about risk, and I let the courts figure out from that what to do.
Critical limitation.
Never do the ultimate. Never do the ultimate question. That's not our job.
Sure. On the line of the influence that we could have here as psychologists and in judges, I'm just going to read this word for word. You can go wherever you want with this. Do you see a lot of implicit bias with psychologists and judges? It's been several people's experiences.
I can see that. It depends what work I'm doing, but this work, because I'm in a current my jurisdiction, the judges know me very well. Matter of fact, they said they don't even want to talk about anything until they see my report. So I've built a very secure relationship with the judges, the attorneys. Even when the attorneys are cross-examining me, they go at me, and then they're like, "Can you move on to lunch?" And I know not to take it personal. They have to do their job. So I have not, and I think in my jurisdiction, and some of them retired, we have about 3 different judges who hear these cases. And sometimes I have to go to appellate court. Sometimes they don't call me to appellate court. So I got appellate court, it's kind of going through it all over again. And I feel that the appellate courts really don't have the biases. They just want to hear the case. It's either send it back to the lower court or they make a decision. So I think it just depends on your jurisdiction, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bishop Christopher, for all that you shared with us, all the work that you put into illustrating all these issues in parental capacity through a case analysis. And I know a lot of people have really appreciated this at different levels of experience here. So your expertise and being willing to share both the ins and outs and then also illustrating it, very helpful for all of us. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Yes, and that wraps up this week's Law and Mental Health series. Next week, as a reminder, we have Dr. Michael Brannon, who will be discussing challenges in doing death penalty related evaluations through the lens of his work in the Parkland school shooting case. We hope to see you then for another great discussion of issues in behavioral health and the law. Until next time.